Garry Cooper-Stanton.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome and also for asking me to come and speak at this event. It's probably the first time I've spoken at a gathering specifically that has included a majority of men in it, which is great to see. So with this side of things, I'm Garry Cooper-Stanton. You've heard about my background. I'm doing a part-time PhD. So with that, I work full-time like everybody else in my job. And then alongside this, I'm also doing my research as part of my PhD. I'm 3 years in out of 6 years. But with that so far, I've discovered quite a few things along the way. So why am I doing this type of research? Well, it's because of working in the area for over 10 years in lymphedema and seeing my patients come through the door, that I noticed that there are differences between the way that men and women engaged with the condition and how they view the condition. And so that led to me going, well, actually, what's out there already? What research is already out there? And so what I ended up doing was scoping, looking at the literature to see my question, what are the experiences of men with non-cancer related lymphedema? Is there actually a need out there? And what I did find in that scoping review was there's probably a majority of research about the experiences of women or women and men together. But what some of the research didn't do was separate men from the women when it came to quotes. So it ended up being very muddled about what the voice was from the men that suffered with this condition. And if there was specifically men, it was focusing on cancer related only. When you look at caseloads, when I did a bit of research previously, actually the majority of cases within lymphedema services are non-cancer. And so that's led to me here. And that took almost 2 years to get to the point there to then start in my PhD. So that's why I felt it was relevant. And one also, when you look at the caseloads, men make up the smaller proportion of the caseloads. Equally in nursing, men make up the smallest proportion when it comes to our female counterparts. And with that, that's why also I found it was interesting to explore that. So what have I done so far? I've done a systematic review. So after the scoping, looks at the details a bit more, presented that at conferences. What I found was people were really interested to uncover this particular area. They wanted to know more. And what it did show when I did this review and created themes was there were certainly 4 themes that came to play. Personhood for men, in terms of who they are as a man, what constitutes that, how that may change as a result of the condition, but also access to services. And now people can say that that's the same for women, but what some of the evidence was reporting was that certain men found it more challenging to access services, especially if they were cancer related only. And that's what some of the research was coming through. It was also meant when they did receive a diagnosis, it was a journey into the unknown. They were given something, but not necessarily the information to tackle or manage that. As part of that, they suddenly had to come to terms with a new norm, a new identity, a new configuration of who they are, and that took time. So that was based on 22 studies, and that was after distilling after 1,000 retrievals down to that. So where are we up to now? Well, I've gone into my next stage, which is 3 stages of my study. Survey online, solicited diaries from those that participated in the survey, and then do interviews with people. How many have I got so far? I've had 20 men participate in my online survey. When compared to the rest of the research, actually, that's not too bad. That's actually pretty good. Not as high as I would like it, because when you look at the figures, there is a lot more men out there, but when you also consider research, men are usually the hardest to reach when it comes to research. So we looked at that and looked at quality of life, how it impacted, and I asked them the statement, okay, you've given that score. Can you explain to me why you've given that score? And certain men were more freer with writing about it. And what they came back with when I looked at all the themes was well-being, came as one. And that was more about their mindset. And certainly when it came to their mindset, some of them were very positive, very independent in the way that they viewed things. And that helped them to get through it and to keep their well-being much more positive. What it didn't take away in all of that was what I class as the emotional seasons, that sometimes it would be great and other times it wouldn't be. Very much a pattern of an up and down. And some of that came from the comfort and discomfort they felt with their condition. Sometimes that affected their ability to move because they had a limb that was bigger than it was. That in fact, it altered the way that they engaged in things, especially their sports. And so that meant to them that they had to have the toll of that, but then had to pace themselves. I could only go so far to do this, but at least I'm doing something. And for others, what they also needed was support around them, and what they would seek is those people they could trust. And that would be their significant others. And other times, if it wasn't quite there, or a relationship wasn't quite right, they would withdraw. Now, that was only the survey. When it came to the diary, which was following people over a couple of weeks, what they found and revealed to me was the fact that there was reminders of their swelling and how it affected them. When their limb was bigger, their emotional comfort was altered. So when it was doing well, they were doing well. When it was stable and in control, they were managing life. When it wasn't, because some of this was out of their control, because the weather would affect things, it would change things, that's out of their control. And so some of that gave them alterations in the way they viewed things. Relationships were also important, both close, but also around them from healthcare professionals or other relevant people. So with this, that created that element of vulnerability that they did express in this. Vulnerability for men to express is extremely hard to show, and that's also what came through. And when you look at the literature, that kind of confirms certain areas of it. But what they did give them when it was potentially embraced and took into their lives was the routine, that they formed a routine that they would always get up, do something, put the compression on, or do something related to it. And that gave them independence, meant they could take back control. And that's what some of them really wanted. Now, the one quote here from a particular man was the main impact of developing the condition was psychological. It took some 18 months for me to accept that I would have the condition for life. And for certain men, they didn't accept it. They're still battling with that. And some of that is 20 years down the line, and other people, they've accepted it much sooner. And that gives us the differences when it comes to men. They're not homogenous, they're not one group. They're as spread out and different as everybody else. When it came to the interviews, and again, this is still ongoing research, these are only provisional themes, they talked about the origin. Where did it start? When did they first notice things? Then they spoke about the journey to get a diagnosis, which took time, differential, going from different things. Suddenly it was potentially a deep vein thrombosis. Maybe it was something else. And then eventually when they did get the diagnosis, it was then the journey to get support, to actually get somebody with the knowledge that could help them. And some of that took years. And other times, actually they had a service down the road that could offer that, and they got it straight away. Those people that had to wait, they did a lot of their own research. They went out there and found it on the internet, sometimes in America, because they didn't realize there was information in the UK they could access. So again, the support about how you access things. When I asked them specifically about masculinity and what it meant to them, what it was interesting was some men couldn't even articulate what that meant to them. But when asked the questions about things, actually the masculinity came through quite strong, because they spoke about the strength being projected, the ability to engage in sport, the ability to be independent. Well, actually, you're expressing your masculinity by even using the terminology. Others wanted to be positive, wanted to be advocates, to get the condition out there, because the vulnerability they sometimes mentioned was the lack of awareness of others in society about how to engage in things. When they walked, people thought they were drunk, rather than the fact of actually their limb is bigger and they're having to compensate for that. So some of the quotes we hear was, I'm just really happy to be getting this therapy right now. because it took them so long. I'm quite hot on managing it myself, but I'd be interested to see where the future goes with it right now. And right now, I'd say I'm managing it. So even though they're managing it, they're going, well, what does the future hold for me? Is it bright? Is it different? And some of the things that I found about diagnosis is quality of life initially started to go down at the beginning when they had the diagnosis, got a bit worse, but then got better. And I think some of that is because they started to accept their condition from what they said. So summing up for here is this journey with me, with the research, that I'm sharing parts of it with you today. Hopefully resonate with you to certain degrees, and some of it may not, but that's because you're individual men in this room with different backgrounds, different stories, but some of this may resonate nevertheless. And in this particular quote, although I've grown to love being me after living with this condition for over 20 years, it's because I've learned to embrace it, and that takes time. So I'd like to say thank you very much for giving me this time just to share with you some of my provisional research, which is still ongoing and will be refined even further. And with that, I say thank you for listening to me.
And tell you is that I was one of those 20 people that Garry recruited for his research, and I can't urge you enough to encourage the male voice in particular, and all of us here that haven't yet spoken to Garry about his research, I urge you to do that. It's all anonymous, and you maybe can explain the process, please, Garry, and then after the process, if you're interested in signing up, he will buy you a pint at the bar.
No, it can't be recorded. No, it's more of a case I can't bribe.
Donation. And then maybe if there's any questions from the floor while Gary's on the stand. So if you could outline the process and do your recruitment drive.
No, that's fine. With this side of things, I've been doing a lot of Twitter, social media, connecting to different organizations to kind of connect with men out there. So what this is all about, even if men do not want to go to the diaries or the interviews, they can do an online survey. With that, I do have your names there, but there's only access to me. And that's for me to be able to then give you a number and everything else. But the online survey asks you questions about your name, your background, your age, qualifications, because that helps me with my analysis, because I'm looking at bigger literature. But it goes through quality of life questions from a validated tool. So it's a well-recognized tool. It asks you about your mobility. How is it affected? Give a score. And then I've asked for a bottom bit to say, could you tell me why you gave this score? Because the numbers itself doesn't tell me why you've given that score. I simply go, actually, it's a number. And that's what I want to move away from. I can crunch some of the numbers, but what I need to know is, why have you given that? And this is where some men were probably more willing to participate in the survey, because it was anonymous. They didn't have to come and speak to me. They didn't have to do anything else, but they shared their voice nevertheless. For those men, when it comes to surveys, there's a tick to say, do you want to be part of the next part of the studies, which is the diary? Now, this is a structured diary, meaning it's got titles. And all I'm asking for is, over a 2-week period of your choice, can you tell me what happens in your life that suddenly made you think on that particular day or that particular week about your condition? And that reveals so much, because it's not about the quantity of what you write, it's about the reasons why you write things. And so I give you that all structured, but I only send that to you if you say, I want to be part of that part of the study. I send an email going, okay, you've expressed an interest. Here's the form. If you'd like to ask me any questions, you can. Some men never respond to me and don't say no or yes, and I take that after doing a few follow-up emails, they don't want me to contact them. That's fine, perfectly fine. But after that, then we have the interview, whereby I ask you some additional questions, because I'm exploring different parts, to go into a bit more detail about why you've given things. And this gives, actually, I find some people said to me that you probably won't get a lot out of the men when you ask a question. Actually, I can stop them talking to me, because what it gave them was suddenly an opportunity for somebody who was interested, who wasn't glazing over with their eyes about talking about the condition, that I was interested in knowing about it. So sometimes I didn't have to say anything at all beyond a nod or to move on to another part of it for them to talk to me. And I think that was the most illuminating aspect when the men were given a space to speak, they did speak. Rather than say perhaps in clinics whereby we only have a certain amount of time that we can give, that after reviewing and doing all sorts of things, we don't have perhaps the time that we would like to have to suddenly give a space for people to air things. So that's what you can do. I do have posters, I have QRS codes that you can scan on your phone, I can send you links to make it as easy as possible for you. I've got email addresses. But with that, even if you don't want to participate in this, share that I'm doing some research if you don't mind, because other men may be interested in taking part. And as always, I will tell all those men that have participated about where the research is being published, what happened to it, and I will still be advocating for men that have participated, because some of the stories that are coming through are not isolated. It's just that these men have come forward first. But what I'm hoping is this will start a bigger set of research going into different areas. This is just one area. There's other areas that we need to explore in lymphedema alone.
Thank you, Garry. Are there any questions from anyone? Well, what I'd like to say, hand on heart, and we've all had a good chinwag at the bar last night, and those who have joined us today, is we don't tend to talk about I've got two of my closest friends here, and it takes a lot for me to open up. Normally my stock archers I'm fine. I dare say we're all the same. Garry, having gone through the questionnaire online and then the diary, which was very interesting, because every day, as we know, can be completely different. You have your good days and then you have your bad days. You know? And it was a question of diarising that for Garry's study. But what was fascinating for me, with all of my shields up, as a man talking about lymphedema who's written a book, but with my shields up, verbally talking about it, Garry's interview, and I was one of those people that you were referring to, that you couldn't shut me up. And it was like a therapy session, because Garry understood and was interested in me, just the right questions to ask. And the weight, I can honestly say, lifted. So I urge you, if you would like to take part, it's a great study. Garry's a great guy, and it doesn't cost a penny apart from your time. Whatever we can do to give back to medical research, and you know, will help future generations, I'm sure, with lymphedema. So thank you again, Garry. I'll just repeat, any more questions or any other questions before? No? All right.
Okay,
well, thank you, Garry.
No, thank you.
Excuse me for a moment.